Hello, everybody. Welcome to Testimonios, a chat with professionals of faculty of color who are going to share their stories with us and talk about their whole pathway from where they were growing up all the way to how they became professors. And the whole purpose of the testimonials is to share their stories, their personal stories, at the same time inviting people who might be thinking about becoming a teacher to look at them and see what pathways they created for themselves. So today, my other guest is Professor Rosiangela Escamilla. And I have to tell you a little bit about herself. About how I know her. She, she was part of this. I was part of the hiring committee, but when I heard her speak, and I'm not gonna share about the committee in the interview because I'm not supposed to, but when I heard her speak, and she was giving her all her pedagogy and sharing her ideas about teaching, I finally felt like I could identify with someone. Because in my department, I felt like I was the only one that had ideas in a particular way, and I had some sort of background from a specific cultural reference. But when I heard her speak and share her ideas and her pedagogy and her philosophy about teaching, I was like, yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's finally someone I can identify with. And ever since then, we've become really good colleagues and friends. And I'm happy that, she's with us, and I'm happy to call her my friend and my colleague. So here we are with Professor Escamilla. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited about our conversation.
Me too, because I know you have a lot to say and a lot to share. Your experience and your testimonio is going to be amazing, and I hope a lot of people who might be watching this interview could identify with you a lot. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your childhood, something that you want to share with us, that you feel comfortable talking about. How was your childhood like? Did you feel like when you were growing up, you knew that you were going to become a professor? You had that idea in mind, or that become later? Anything you want to share with us about that?
Um, so as a child, I was raised by my grandmother. My mom had me when she had just turned 16, so she was a teenager, a child herself, really legally. And I was born in Tijuana, in the frontera, and she was working at the maquiladoras in the 80s. Back then, I was born in 1980. And obviously, if she could only focus on one thing at a time, so she decided to take me to my grandmother in Nayarit so she can raise me. And and so and so I had that kind of like very unique upbringing, being raised by a grandmother. I think there's something very special when you're raised by grandparents. I don't know if they feel that they don't have that responsibility. That's your child, and I think they're so much more lenient and te consienten mucho más. Um, I was like my grandmother Lucia's consentida. I slept with her. She was the first mother figure as I grew up. And with her, I lived in a rural, in a village almost type of setting, not even paved roads. And I had a really beautiful child with her until I turned about 8 years old, and I was about to start third grade. And my mother, just kind of realized she had crossed into San Diego now,
Mm,
obviously knowing that the wages on the other side of the border were a lot more than in Tijuana. As a maquiladora worker, she's always been a waitress ever since she crossed and came to San Diego.
mhm,
So on one of those visits, she brings me with her, and that was really disruptive for me. That was probably one of the most traumatic, like childhood events in my life. Being taken away from my rural setting, from eating mangoes like from the trees,
mhm,
um, boxes of cereals on a one-bedroom apartment in Barrio Logan. so my childhood was very, very unique, very, I had a lot of experiences that had a deep impact in my, the way that I saw the world. I was definitely very, very traumatized by, being brought to the United States, by not knowing English, by being kind of like an excellent student in Mexico, and then being seen as someone who was incapable of expressing herself in a new language, in a new culture. I absolutely felt isolated, as my first school was Hearst Elementary, and I think it was in La Mesa or close to Claremont. I can't recall, but I was bused also as well too, right? So here you have a child that was taken from her grandmother, forced into a new environment, forced to be seen almost as this animal, almost, right? To the rest of the kids, because she couldn't speak for herself. All I had were my eyes, and I looked at everybody like with distrust. And so that was that. I think things got better once I went into a school where there was more brown kids that I could relate to, that I could speak Spanish to, that, obviously we shared the same cultura, and we lived in the same neighborhood as well too, right? I didn't have to get up early to take the bus. I could walk to Logan Elementary. And then after that, I went to Perkins Elementary. So really I have a childhood in Nayarit, and then a childhood in Barrio Logan. And I think I moved a lot as I grew up. I, being working class, my mother being a single mother, living off of her wages as a waitress. And we moved a lot. I went to Hearst Elementary, then Logan Elementary, then Perkins Elementary, and then I went to Marston Middle School, and then I went to Gompers Secondary School in the 90s, when that school had a reputation of violence and racial tensions between the students. And then I went to Bonita Vista High School, and then finally I graduated from Point Loma High School. I used to take the city bus to get to Point Loma High School, but obviously by then I had acquired the language. I had blended in with the culture. And in high school, I developed a deep sense of my identity, I believe. I became involved in Mecha in high school, but most importantly, I did this camp that was called CYLC, Chicana Youth Leadership Camp. And I want to say that camp was probably instrumental in my formation as a Chicana, and kind of like, finding value in the history of us, right? Brown people in the Southwest.
Right.
And it gave me a deep sense of community commitment, and a deep sense of political awareness, especially since in 1994 you had the walkouts, and I was at Compers at the time, and I participated in the walkouts. And if you remember, 1994 walkouts were students from public schools walked out in protest of Pete Wilson's anti-immigrant law, right? Proposition 187, which actually passed. And so I think part of my reality really is what politicized me, right? I mean, there's really no other way around, but also just kind of like, having that inquiry and questioning, I've always had this kind of personality that questions reality, and questions, why are we facing such things in life?
Right. Wow, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that experience, because I think that a lot of us easily identify with your experience. I'm not saying it's the same experience, because each of us lives it in a very unique way, but you sharing, something that a lot of us really connect with. When you mentioned you grew up with your abuelita, I think most of us in the Latino communities and households do have that experience and that connection with our grandmothers. But at the same time, you understanding who you were and what your environment was such an early age when you mentioned you were in high school. I think that was also a great moment to really highlight, because it feels to me, and you let me know if it's true or not, but it feels to me that that was a pivotal moment for you to say, I'm a Chicana, and this is what I need to do now, right? So do you think that that moment or those particular experiences that you went through kind of shape you in the professor that you are right now, or how do you think you became that interested in being a professor?
Yeah, I mean, the camp that I went to, COLC, was really an investment in popular and community education to young Chicanos and young Chicanas, and it's a program that invited students from all of the San Diego region, South and North County, and put them together to learn about our past, our history, right? So, think of this as like Chicano studies classes for 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds.
Nice.
And sometimes most of us, or most of our students, sometimes have to wait until they get to college to kind of like see U.S. history from an ethnic studies or from a social justice framework. So I think that it absolutely shaped me. It absolutely just formed me, gave me consciousness, and gave me a sense of commitment to community, to education. I think that's what solidified my I need to go to college. It doesn't matter that I don't have papers, I'll find a way, but I have to go to college because I wasn't torn from my grandmother. I haven't seen my mother struggle all her life waitressing, so that I don't sort of pay a tribute or pay back for all the hard work and all that pain that the family had been through, right? In terms of being a torn family, right, or being a family divided by a border, right?
Right.
And so I think CYLC is definitely what started kind of or pushed me towards understanding that education is an empowering tool, and it's very necessary, especially for oppressed communities, Chicano communities.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm glad that you had that opportunity because in my experience, I didn't identify myself as Chicano until I was in grad school and I started reading Chicano literature when I was like, whoa, what's this? Speaking to me. But I'm glad that you had that moment, that epiphany, earlier. I'm thankful for those programs because I'm thinking about other uh, colegas, that might have the same experience as you did. So tell me about your pathway to becoming a teacher. So you graduated high school and then you went to what college? How was that process?
So I was when everybody was submitting their applications to different universities, right? Because obviously that was in my mind. I knew that that's something that I wanted to do. I wanted to go to the university. I mean, as an undocumented person, I that wasn't really feasible or possible because back then there were no such things as AB 540 or the DREAM Act in California for undocumented students in California. So I mean, I even looked at universities in Mexico if that was the case, or if I needed to do that, right? But luckily, I remember outreach that was done by community colleges, and I remember City College being one of the colleges that went into Point Loma High School, and so San Diego City College became the only opportunity, the only pathway at the moment, because back then also too, as far as being undocumented, that meant that you wouldn't be eligible for financial aid. But back then, each unit was $11 a unit. So I paid really my way through my first, it wasn't two, it was from the spring semester of 1999 to until the fall semester of 2006 that I finally transferred to UCSD. So that's about 7 years of a lot of classes, of a lot of obstacles in my way, primarily, being undocumented, and finally regulating my status through marriage, actually through the person I was dating back then, who is my father's son now. I think, the obstacles that I had were like enormous. They were really, there were real barriers. But I really did have that natural, like, love of learning and love of literature. I remember definitely excelling in my literature classes, my English classes, in my Chicano studies classes, and not excelling on the sciences, right? Like in the math is definitely something that helped me behind. And I knew when I was at City College already that I wanted to be an educator. I think I wanted to be a high school high school teacher, because I wanted to get as many youth of color, as many working class children into the university, and I wanted them to inspire and to love education the way that I loved it.
Wow. So would you mind sharing some of those obstacles that you kind of mentioned? Being undocumented is one of them, but I guess I'm going to rephrase the question here. What kept you going? What was that, even though you realized what obstacles you had to face, what kept you going, and what motivated you to say, I don't care, I'm just going to get through this?
I think it must have been my internal sort of drive, my necessity to thrive, right? My understanding of how important it was that I get to the university. In terms of like other obstacles, we're talking about somebody who had to work so that I would be able to pay for my classes. And so I worked the menial jobs, usually, that college students, work, right? At the fast food, the hostessing at restaurants, that kind of stuff. One positive, really positive experience I had also at City College was also athletics. I got a chance to fulfill sort of like, my athletic passion of playing soccer intercollegiately. And that wasn't necessarily an obstacle, but it was definitely, I focused so much on that I would have a hard time passing my hard classes like math. I think it was, during the time that I was playing soccer for City College that I took Math 95 like 3 times and Math 96 like 2 times. So it was I think what kept me going was just really the fact that I also enjoyed school. The fact that like I didn't really have any other identity, I want to say, right? Or passion, for life. And the other thing that I think also sustained me was probably my work that I really loved at the time. From 2001 to about 2004, I worked as a ESL tutor in O'Farrell Community School. And so I worked with middle school children who were learning the language. And I think I saw myself in them every day that I faced them, every day that I helped them with their schoolwork. And I think that was also motivation. That was also kind of like, what, you know, kept me going, and kind of like understanding why I needed to make that second crossing now, right? Like into the university now, right? And I think those children definitely reminded me every day, because what's kind of beautiful is that, like, you know, once years later, when I was adjuncting at City College, I actually got some students who remembered me,
Uh,
who took the classes, my English classes at City College, who were, you know, ESL students that I tutored back in the early 2000s, which, you know, that was something, you know, really beautiful to me.
wow, that's really impressive. That's a really good full circle, you know, and just seeing, because I remember when I was in ESL, and when I just realized how long of a pathway or how many classes I had to take, ESL classes, to get to 100 or 101, it seemed like never was going to happen. But when I got to the English 100 or 101, it was just such an accomplishment for me. You know, so I'm imagining these students that you tutored when they were in the learning process, and then getting to that 101 class, which is not easy, you know, must have been such a great rewarding moment for them, seeing you there, you know, as their professor, and then remembering you as their tutor. So that's a really great, um, very heartwarming story. Um, Another thing I'm curious about, because you mentioned you struggled with math, right? And the sciences were a little bit not of your forte,
Yeah.
but why do you think that was the case, for you not being too comfortable, or not necessarily comfortable, but, you know, not really being able to pass those classes that you mentioned?
I think it's probably the type of pedagogy, obviously, that the
Mm.
math professors, you know, have. Pretty much just teaching to a textbook and teaching to tests and teaching to quizzes. And, you know, the burden of giving you just so much homework that kind of like, you know, tires you, wears you down. And aside from the fact that, you know, it definitely was not my strength, was not my area of interest. And I do believe that things are kind of changing, especially at City College. Since when I was there, I saw a few professors kind of like changing their approach, and, you know, mixing, for instance, math with hip hop, or doing more culturally responsive pedagogy in math classes, right? So it was. I think it's not the student's fault when a student keeps taking the same class over and over and over again, and they continue to fail in that same class over and over and over again, you know. And I think we, as I think the institutions, you know, community college, you know, really need to kind of, you know, question or think about, like, you know, if the same math is good for everybody, for instance, right? You know, or the same approach is good for everybody. And you know, create pedagogies, or math classes, you know, that perhaps are more tailored to different kinds of students.
Wow. Yeah, because again, I think the idea of you not giving up, even though it's a, you know, difficult class, is challenging in itself. I think math and English are the most challenging classes that a lot of us have to take. But again, what I'm getting from all of this is your resilience. You know, your ability to like keep going and say, I'm gonna uh, make it through, although otherwise there's no option for me. So I love that. So let me see if I got this right. So you went to City College after high school, right? And then you transferred to San Diego State. Is that right?
Well, initially, I got accepted to San Diego State.
Okay.
And this was in 2004,
Mm-hmm.
in the summer of 2004, when I finally adjusted my, or was in the process of adjusting my legal status, and you know, with immigration. at the time. And so I had gotten accepted to San Diego State to start in the fall of 2004. And the kind of visa that was available to me was not a spouse visa, but I think it was like, it was a visa that where I had to go to Ciudad Juárez, Mexico, and I had to go to that embassy to process the regulation. And unfortunately for me, because I had been in the United States undocumented for so many years, and because I had no way to prove that I had crossed into the United States with documents, I was chastised by immigration services, and I had to write a pardon letter, and I had to wait in Tijuana for about 6 months for this pardon letter to be approved. And so I lost my admission to San Diego State. And what you know, but then again, you know, like I always have this capacity to turn, you know, obstacles or negativity into, you know, something positive, right? Right? Make lemonade out of the lemons, right? So what ended up happening was that I finally went back to Ciudad Juárez, and I was finally granted, you know, the adjustment. I decided to take the extra classes, the biology class, and I decided to do the TAC program to UCSD instead. And I gained admission to UCSD. So instead of starting, you know, at San Diego State in the fall of 2004, I started UCSD in fall 2006, because I had it took me like a year to sort of take, like, I think it was just 2 classes, because I was also working at the time as well. So I could take like 1 class at a time.
Wow, that's impressive. I think we should definitely have, I'm thinking about having like a part 2 where you talk about, you know, those moments where you had to wait and 6 months away from, you know, from your family, from your home, because San Diego became your home, in Tijuana, right? It's just, yeah, it's not.
Those 6 months of Tijuana were a lot of waiting. And yeah, I mean, you know, it was definitely, you know, like I definitely felt punished
for something that you didn't do, you know, for a crime that you didn't commit, and that's not, you know, that's not. But again, we're gonna have a conversation later, just to kind of dig deeply into these conversations, what it means to be undocumented and what it means to be taken away, you know, and being, like you said, chastised. But I also want to focus more on the positive things, on the brighter side of your story. Not that the other is negative, but, you know, definitely empowering. But, you know, I want to focus more on your degree, because I want to get to the point where you decided that you wanted to teach, right? But your major was literature, am I right? Or what was your major when you applied?
Well, actually, my when I wrote that statement of purpose in my application to UCSD, I actually chose Latin American Studies as my desired major. And I, you know, at the time, I mean, I was kind of like playing with ideas of, you know, even journalism. I was very interested in the politics in Latin America. I was I you know, then took my first quarter, because it's a quarter system at UCSD. And I took classes in Latin American studies. I think I took a class in like Peruvian culture, I think, Andean culture. But I also took this class with Professor Luis Martin Cabrera, who, you know, later became the chair of my dissertation, but, you know, not then, right? Not yet. I took a class on Latin American literature and cinema with him, which was listed as cross-listed as both a Latin American studies class and then also a literature class. And this guy was Spanish, right? A Spanish radical. And I had more connection with the Spanish, like, you know, radical than with Latin American professors that I was taking, or I was being exposed to my first quarter at UCSD. The way that he ran his discussions, his lectures, the way that he blended film with culture, with literature, the kind of dynamic just discussions that he created in the class made me just switch from Latin American studies to literature. And I was like, oh no, like this is what I want to do. I want to do what he's doing. And I mean, the guy didn't come out of nowhere. I had actually met him when I was at City College, and I had actually met him on one of the tours that City College professor Enrique Dávalos organized in the Maquiladoras in Tijuana. So I remember meeting him months before through that experience, and then finding him in as my first professor in literature at UCSD, and really his class on Latin American lit culture and cinema is what made me switch into literature.
Nice. Wow, that's very interesting that you mentioned that. I think it's a really good point to really discuss here, because it's interesting to me that you didn't feel as identified with the Latin American professors as you did with this quote unquote Spanish radical, which I love the term. Why do you think that is? Because I think most of us could relate to that situation where you think, oh, he's Latino or she's Latina, or they look like me, or they kind of sound like me. I feel like I'm gonna identify with them, but most of the time that doesn't happen. So I'm wondering, like, what do you think that case may be for you?
Yeah, I know exactly why I identified with Luis Martin Cabrera more so than with Christine, Tunefeld, who taught and culture, and it had to do with class consciousness, class performance, class as lived in the classroom. I mean, Luis Martin Cabrera is from a town, from Béjar, un pueblito, so es de pueblo. And not only is he from a pueblo, but he acts like pueblo, and he treats students like pueblo, or he sees every student with potential and with creativity, and he really kind of as a Spanish radical, right, without the term anti-colonial or decolonial classroom even being expressed, he was really just creating that classroom, but in the manner in the manner that he treated his students, all his students. He would, walk in, sit on his desk and say, let's conversate, as opposed to the other professors, for example, that specialist on Andean literature, produced a classroom that was very classist, that was very, sort of that centered her as the center of knowledge. And, she never really kind of made us feel that we could contribute something to the class, or the class could be something that we made the class. And that's what it was. It was just the fact that the guy, made literature about people, about us.
I love that. I love the fact that you were able to pinpoint it and just say, this is what it is, because I agree with you. I think most of us, when I'm thinking about my own experience teaching, I think I was very caught up with the idea that I had to teach English composition in a very specific way, and that is and even with ESL as well, it's just very colonialized, very very specific in that we're linear, very strict, very limiting, not allowing that agency from students to bring in their voices. And I think a lot of us as professions of color, not necessarily only Latinos or Latinx, feel the pressure of kind of fulfill that expectation from white colleagues or counterparts, where we feel like we have to again fulfill that expectation. And somehow in my case, when I started adjuncting, when I started as an adjunct, I felt like I was I had this imposter syndrome where I felt like, oh, you know, they could have given it to someone else, but they gave that opportunity to me. So I'm going to show them, you know, that I could do it the same way. So I'm not assuming that that's the case for everybody, but, you know, kind of giving that other perspective into why some of these professionals of color might act that way might be because of that aspect as well. But I like the way that you explained it as well. But let's jump back into your own experience, because I haven't forgotten about that. So you got your bachelor's, right? And then you went right into the master's program, or how'd that jump happen? Did you take a break?
Yeah. I think honestly, like everything in my life has been circumstance and has been a strike of good luck. And I once I again, right, like I wanted to be a high school teacher. So on my last year at UCSD, I did a minor in education, and I actually interned for a full year in 3 different schools in San Diego. First at Roosevelt Junior High, and then at Lincoln High, and then at Mar Vista High School. And you know, doing that minor guaranteed you a spot in the Masters of Education program at UCSD, because I thought I was going to teach high school at the high school level. And so that was the plan, right? But and this is why I don't like planning life, because you never know what's going to happen. One of my classmates, Melissa, was working at UCSD in the mail services in the summer after we had already graduated, because we graduated in the same year. We both kind of like took like the same, you know, upper ed literature classes with the same professors. And she ran into one of the professors from UCSD. And Rosaura Sanchez. And Rosaura, you know, saw Melissa and asked her, what are you and Rosie gonna do since you guys graduated, right? And Melissa and I had kind of like, you know, thought about the idea of graduate programs, you know, beyond like what my first intention was. And she said, well, we're thinking about applying to, you know, UC, I think it was Irvine or Riverside, I don't remember. And she was like, están locas, you know, las quiero aquí, you know, I want you here, both of you, you know, need to, you know, you have about 2 weeks to get your application, and I want you to apply to the PhD program here with us, right? And so, I mean, what that means is that we were really kind of like, you know, recruited, right, by a Chicana, you know, Saura Sanchez, kind of like, you know, is the one that kind of suggested, or not even suggested, just demanded that Melissa and I, you know, just, you know, put our application in. And I also had the support of other faculty. So, I mean, you know, we did that non-traditional kind of path where we'd stayed in our same university, right? You know, we did like the BA at UCSD, and then we both entered the master's and PhD program in the same institution, right? You know, I know that is kind of like seldom happens, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the work that we kind of produced in the upper division classes at UCSD in the literature department really impressed, and you know, really kind of like the faculty, you know, took a liking, right? You know, kind of like, you know, of us, right? And so, you know, we were just very lucky really to be recruited by the you know, faculty there, you know, especially at Chicana.
Wow. That's really nice. I think that's a key component, right, in the story, that you have these people who believed in you and kind of pushed you, you know, kind of forced you, like that mothering, nurturing aspect that you know, that you felt from your faculty mentor. So that's amazing. So you are in the PhD program, but you also got a master's degree. Is that how it works?
Yeah, because the program is a master's PhD program. So what that means is that like you get your master's first, and once you qualify, right? Once you ABD, then you go for towards your work on the dissertation and the doctorate.
Very nice.
So it's a two. So I mean,
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. So you finish your master's, right? And now you're working on your PhD.
Working on the dissertation.
On the dissertation, nice. So you're gonna be soon, Dr. Escamilla.
I mean, I would absolutely, right.
Yes.
It's something definitely that I wanna finish. Not. It feels kind of like like the last like leg of my marathon, right? I think I already talked to you about all the obstacles that I've faced, right? And this is, I think, probably like the last mile from a whole marathon, right?
Yeah, but you'll do it. I mean, you'll finish it because it's just, everything that you've shared so far is just a testament, a testimonio of how, how strong you are and how committed you are to finishing your and accomplishing your goals. So I want to now talk about the moment that you received your master's degree. And then right after that, did you say, I'm going to go teach, or how did that happen? How did that jump into teaching happened?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned before in terms of like the creating these supportive, having the supportive people in your life and remembering who they were, right? And then so when I qualified, when I took my qualifying exams, which were oh my gosh, I mean, they were hard. And I think I passed them, right? So that was really nice. And then I was already student teaching, or like TAing at UCSD. I was at Dimensions of Cultures. I was teaching writing already at the university, but more like in a TA position. I somehow was also invited to apply to teach at City College, because there was a professor at San Diego City College, Roberta Alexander, who had been my professor when I was there. I took about two or three classes with her, Chicana literature, Latin American literature. And I remember that Luis Martin Cabrera and others had organized, and myself actually, and other grad students had organized a viewing at UCSD of the Black Power mixtape. And we invited Roberta Alexander to come and talk about that era, because she's a former Black Panther. And it was through that organizing of that event, when I told her, yes, I qualified, I'm ready to teach at a community college level. And she said, you need to come to City College, you need to apply. And so I think, right, like you don't go through these obstacles on your own. Like, it's a network of people, it's a community of people that kind of help you get through, right? And that's what happened. I applied to teach, and I remember my interview, Elba Salinas interviewed me, along with the chair at the time at City. And I got my first class that was my own class ever. And I remember the moment, like, my very first class, my very first day, and it just felt, talk about, like full circles, right? Going back to the community college that formed you. And it was really a beautiful, fulfilling. And I was very excited to teach. And from there on, I think I just kind of, fell in love with the beauty of teaching, with the profession of teaching English, and with touching lives yourself, right?
Right. Absolutely. And It's a really great way of you mentioning, and again, I love the fact that you mentioned that it takes people. You know, you're not self-sufficient in any way. You need to have people alongside your way, or by your side, to kind of give you that push, to kind of give you that recommendation or suggestion or networking and whatnot to get to where you need to be. And I think you mentioned it really well, and I appreciate that you are recognizing that, because sometimes um, we get so caught up with our own selves. The narcissistic part of us keep saying, well, you did on your own. And I think in many ways, this culture kind of values that a lot, this minimalist type of on your own type of way. But you mentioned a really key point here, and I think for our communities in the Latinx and Hispanic communities, that's key. Having someone that is going to give you that push, that is going to give you that suggestion, or that regaño, the pull of
Yeah.
ears. It's definitely something you need sometimes. So you mentioned that you had your first class. Do you remember what textbooks do you teach? What was that experience? Can you give us a little more details on that?
Sure. Yeah. So they City College had this. Well, they had learning communities, right? I think Mesa has had those learning communities, or still has those, right?
Hmm.
I was teamed up to work with Enrique Davalos, which was also really cool because I had worked with Enrique Davalos before, not necessarily in the classroom, but organizing in the community. And so my first class was, I think, a composition class. It was like English 48 or 49. I
Hmm.
believe it was English 49. And I do remember what we taught, because I think City College had this thing where like it was one book that everybody taught. And we did like the portfolio. So like the book that was chosen then was the Sherman Alexie book, short story or novel, Tonto,
Hmm.
and
Lone Ranger.
The Lone Ranger, Fist
Hmm.
Fight in Heaven. I think that's the title, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the first book that I taught. So and it was interesting because I mean, it was daunting also as well too, right? Because I was kind of beginning to understand what worked best for me as an educator, right? What kind of
Hmm.
pedagogies worked best for me. I tried things, things didn't work, but it's all about finding what works for you and what works for the students. I do remember the students, connecting a lot to our discussions, to the readings, to really kind of like, the very kind of collaborative, learning environment that we created in the class. So it was a very successful um, first class where I learned a lot. And then I also learned how to work with colleagues as well too, right? Because some of the lectures, some of the themes, were very much kind of connected to Enrique Davalos' Chicano Studies class, because it was a learning community.
Very cool. I think that's also key to having the support from colleagues and from the department to be able to get and redefine or define your teaching pedagogy. How long did you or how long were you teaching part time before
Um,
you become full time?
yeah, so I think there was a year that I spent teaching at both UCSD and City College,
Hmm.
because I was TAing for Dimensions of Culture,
Hmm.
and then I was teaching like one class at a time, right? And then the next semester I got two, and then the third semester I got three classes. So it progressed, right? As
Hmm.
far as like the amount of the class load that I got as an adjunct. I was also invited to teach in Chicana studies as well, given that my expertise in my master's was with Chicano studies. My dissertation is on the Chicano movement. So I started teaching in 2 departments.
Nice.
And then the fact that City College is such a community-oriented, social justice-oriented kind of campus, I kind of like also created, new things for myself at City College. One of the things that I think I'm probably most proud of was bringing some of my professors from UCSD to speak at San Diego City College, and I would do these series at the end of my composition classes that were called Art Against Empire. And what that was is pretty much an exhibit of the the creative projects of the students, but then also it was a social justice panel in which I'd bring a speaker, that kind of like would synthesize everything that we learned in kind of like like a very how do I want to say it? I mean, Dennis Childs, for instance, was one of the first ones that came, and he's an expert in the carceral system. His book, Slaves of the State, is a book that was looking already at the prison nation and at the prison industrial complex, at a time before Ava DuVernay came up with her film on Netflix, right, 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, like I was kind of like, bringing in the people whom, I work with at UCSD and putting them at that disposal of the students at City College, and, letting them know that, like, for instance, us looking at a Black Power mixtape or reading Angela Davis or Assata Shakur wasn't in a vacuum, right? It wasn't an actual history, and you had actual professors who, would create entire professions based on, that social problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were really, really, I think, successful, culminating community celebration and involvement of everybody, and yeah, so those were really
Very nice. I love that. I love the fact that you had that academic freedom. And I think, in a way, the environment in which you were teaching kind of not necessarily pushed you, but it allowed you to have that, and bring in those important texts and stories that are so valuable and are necessary to decolonize teaching, education, and specifically writing. So I love the fact, and when you mentioning that, you kind of took me back to that moment when I was listening to you for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, I need to do more, because you do have this, you transmit this passion for social justice and for teaching in within that frame of work, that I'm like, I need to do more. It's like I need to be out there and do that. So thank you for sharing that. One thing that I also want us to have a conversation about is your transition between being an adjunct and a full-time. And for those of you who don't know the process, it can become very difficult and competitive in our field to get a full-time position, and some people even refer to this transition as winning the lottery, because it's really random, and it's very random is the word. So that when you become a full-time, or you're hired as full-time, apparently you win the lottery. What do you think about that term?
I mean, not necessarily, because I'd prefer to win the lottery.
Right?
I prefer to get like 20 million already, right? But it's definitely a high stakes, very competitive, very hard achievement to reach, right? To be able to finally become a contract or a tenure track, professor as opposed to an adjunct professor, right? Because of the lack, the very limited, full-time, the very limited, opportunities when a full-time position becomes available, right? I don't think necessarily that it's hard to, well, it is really hard to kind of like, be the one that's chosen, right?
Right.
But I think there's so much creative, influential, amazing, adjunct, colleagues that we have, right? But it's just, I think that like the limited spaces, when you have just like, one position or, 2 or 3 positions open, every 2 or 3 years, something like that, right? Then it becomes sort of like a bone, right? That is thrown, and then like, let's see who gets it, right?
Hunger Games, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, difficult. I was again, right? Like I don't, the fact that like it wasn't until like my 5th interview that I finally made it to the second round of interviews, right? With management or with administration, right?
With the president.
And then I finally was awarded, right? With the tenure track position. It's because I could have just given up, right? I mean,
Right.
5 times, right? But then again, I'm not a person that gives up very easily, right? I looked at them as sort of opportunities to learn, how to best express who you are as an educator in this, very limited, 1 hour frame that you get to tell a panel about, who you are, right? Because it really is about like the art of learning how to best present yourself more effectively and clearly. And then after that, it's really not about you, right? Like it really is just about, who they want to work with, right? Whom did they see as their desired colleague, right? Because we're talking about like, people get to choose who they spend kind of like the rest of their lives with as colleagues, right? As collaborators, right? As people who, I mean, like we as professors spend how much time of our days in our offices, in our departments, and so I think it really is about kind of like, matching personalities almost, right? Or matching visions of education, right? More so. So I think the more that, I guess, if I'm to give advice to those who are seeking a full-time position, right? Just don't give up and understand that it's never really about you, right? But it's about, a match, right? It's about, you want to be in a place where they want you, first of all.
Right.
Right. In at least, I felt that I've, obviously, felt very lucky to have gotten that position, but more so, I feel that like I was wanted. I feel that like, that people believe that I can contribute something to the department, and I think that's more important. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is true. It's not necessarily about you, and it's something that, is whether or not your teaching approaches and your pedagogy and your personality really fits with what they're looking for, and vice versa, right? And I remember that that comment my faculty mentor told me once, because I asked her, what does it take me? How long does it take me to get a full-time? And she mentioned pretty much what you're saying, that you have to figure out that department, that school that fits with your views, with your teaching, with your pedagogy, et cetera, et cetera. So you went through the process of interviewing 5 times.
Yes.
And it wasn't until the 5th time.
Yes.
Yeah, no hay quinto malo.
Yes.
Right? 5th is a charm.
Yeah, which is fine.
So it's a lucky number. So, but you were hired at a different college, right? You were not hired at City where you had been teaching. You were hired at a different college, Mesa College.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about that? Is it something that you obviously wanted because you applied, but I guess my question is, do you feel like at this college and in this department that you are at, as a full-time will give you that platform that you need as a full-time to continue doing what you're doing with the social justice type of curriculum that you're bringing to the classroom?
I mean, absolutely. I think what it is right after like finishing my master's, I had so much vigor. I had so much energy. I had so much ideas, and then the situation was that I was in a campus that welcome, and professors were doing that already, right?
Mhm.
And so but going back to like your original question, right, in terms of like how does it feel to have landed a full-time position in a college where I'd never stepped foot on. But that's not necessarily because I had taken a class at Mesa College when I was at City College. It was a journalism class.
Nice.
But that's another side story.
Yeah.
The little stories within the big testimonial, right?
Right.
But I mean, for me, it didn't really matter where I was because my teaching is what it is. And I felt comfortable where I landed. I feel very welcome, and I just also feel that again, having gone through those previous 4 rejections does take a toll on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I feel that I do feel that as when I finally landed a tenure track position, I felt that I could rest a little bit, right? I felt that I could take my time, right? A little bit. That I needed to first assess the culture of the new school.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I hadn't been at Mesa before, right? I think luckily for a lot of us that teach from a social justice lens and that are professors of color, right, that centered the issue of race and racism and classism and sexism and all these other systems of oppression, right, in our curriculum and pedagogy. I think now is the moment for us to really kind of take advantage of that. It's becoming more and more evident that racism is one of the major kind of obstacle in the lives of people of color. And I think now is the perfect time to bring, right, that it's not that I haven't been doing it because I've been teaching, for instance, the autobiography of Malcolm X, the one by Assata Shakur.
Mm-hmm.
I've been teaching books that deal with social problems, right, through storytelling, right, and through literature. But I definitely feel like you. I feel that I've derailed from my commitment to real activism from out of my classroom, right? And I do want to do more, and I do want to incorporate more. For instance, maybe community activism, maybe bringing in more activists that are doing the work out there, and bringing them to kind of talk to students in the classroom, for instance, right? Or perhaps even kind of re-envision how I would bring back something like Art Against Empire at Mesa College.
Nice. I love that. And yeah, definitely. I think that's something that for me, I sometimes, like I mentioned before, I feel like I should be doing more and just listening to what you're doing, what you're bringing to the classroom, what you're teaching. But I think at the same time, you also brought it up. It's just that this is the moment to do to do something, you know. I think the eyes, not just of the country, but of the world, are looking at people of color to see what we're going to bring, because I feel like finally, after so many decades of speaking up and saying, hey, we matter, you know, particularly with the Black communities, it's finally happening. And I feel like we are in the second wave of civil rights movement, and I feel a huge responsibility, you know, as a person of color, to keep that fight going, you know, that lucha continuing. um and to be honest with you, I am looking up to you and then say, what is she doing? How is she bringing it up? And I appreciate the unapologetic type of, and in a good way, you know, type of not attitude, but you know, demeanor that you have to bring these conversations into the classroom, because I've heard from other colleagues that there's a little bit of apprehension from students that feel like, you know, you have an agenda, or that you are only focused on teaching this particular thing. Have you had that situation, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you were mentioning sort of like, you know, finally, you know, we're gonna have that moment, right? And then you know, kind of like just going back to, you know, the words that I used before, right? You know, that it's more work. It involves more emotional labor, right? You know, that's like, you know, that's the multiple the multiplicity of things that arise, you know, in a classroom, you know, that is based on a theme around, you know, social problems, social justice, right? But, you know, then again, you know, it always takes me back to, I always think of the mentors that we have, right? You know, we have literary mentors, right? You know, we have people like, you know, Toni Morrison, people like James Baldwin, people like Malcolm X, people like Assata Shakur, right? Who also had to face, you know, pushback, right? You know, or you know, people who prefer to be apolitical, or people who prefer to not see the problems of the world because they didn't want to grow up and they didn't want to take the personal responsibility that we all have as members of a community, right? You know, of a city, of a state, of a country, of the world, right? That it involves everybody, right? I think it's about courage. It's about also understanding the work that's necessary work, that's not easy work, right? You know, it's easier for me to kind of like you know, teach fun stuff, or teach literature that doesn't create tension in the classroom, right? Or literature that where everybody's going to be happy, right? But unfortunately, that's not being responsible. I'm not being a responsible educator, and they're not being responsible students, right? You know, as a result. And I want to create like you know, a sense of responsibility in my classroom, social responsibility, political responsibility, human responsibility. And so that's the way that I see it, right? And you know, that at the same time, right, you know, like, you know, just because we face a problem doesn't mean that it has to be depressing, and that you know, we cannot do anything about it, right? I mean, I think it's important that we understand that, like, okay, you know, perhaps we don't have, you know, a solution to racism, but there's ways in which we can tackle the way that we deal with racism on a personal level,
Right.
or with our families, or you know, at Mesa, right? You know, or with each other in this classroom, right? Or personally, right? You know, like with our own. So that's the beginning of right? You know, I mean, you know, we're never gonna fix the problem of racism if we never face it, first of all.
Right. I love that. I really like, you're just like, you know, saying it. And I love that. So hopefully other faculty can take that and apply it to the classroom and to the students, because you're either in or you're out. And if you're out, you're not being a responsible American. You're not being a responsible citizen, and you have a responsibility for your city, for your community, and for your country, right? That's the true hero. I love that. Now we're wrapping up this conversation, and I want to ask you this question. What would you say to that student who is in a similar situation where she feels that, or he might feel the drive to do something for her community, his community, and feels this fire, within themselves to talk about social justice and to become a teacher? What would be that one piece of advice that would you provide?
I think to listen to their heart, right? And to not betray it, right?
Mm.
And to always have the courage, right? To speak their truth, right? And to seek truth in others. And I think people, if there's some hope, I hope that if I still have hope in the society, that if there is something that people, something that it's still valuable, is when people are honest, right? And people are their true themselves, even if it means being vulnerable, or even if it means having an opinion or a viewpoint that's not popular.
Right.
I would just give that person that advice, just listen to that truth in you, right? And don't betray it.
Nice. I love that. Thank you for that advice.
Yeah.
Last question to wrap this up is something that I was asked at some point and I didn't know how to answer because I had never thought about it. But if you were, or if you had to choose a different profession instead of being a professor, what would it be and why?
Of course, an author, a writer, a poet, a published, poet, right? I think what ultimately really seduced me, or lured me into literature, was storytelling. And I even remember, like taking this journalism class at Mesa College, the only class that I took at Mesa College, during my college year, because I looked at the great writers like Faulkner and Hemingway, and our very own Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that they started as journalists before they became novelists. And so in my mind, I was like, oh well, I first have to become a journalist, so that way I can prove my writing abilities, right, and arsenal, and then I can tell grand narratives, and I can be a novelist.
I love it. So you want to become a writer, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. So what would you write if you were to write your novel, fiction, nonfiction, memoir even, how would you title it?
How would I title it? I don't necessarily have a title, but I think that I want to write the novel of, I feel that in Chicano literature, I feel that the novel about the campo, the campesinos, has been written. And I feel that the novel about in the service sector, like, the restaurants, the hotel industry, or even the construction workers, those are the stories that haven't been written, that haven't been told. And I want to be the writer that, hopefully one day.
I know.
And then
You
it will
should.
also be kind of like honoring my mother's lifelong, kind of work, right, as a waitress.
I love that. You should write it and I'll be the one like reading it right away and teaching it in my classes. That'd be great. Well, thank you so much, Rosiangela, for this was a fun interview. I loved everything that you mentioned. It's an inspiring story, and I am sure that a lot of people are going to be, um, you know, really inspired by your tenacity, your capacity to confront any obstacles, and at the same time your resilience. So I really appreciate you for that, and I think it's necessary to have a second part to this interview to talk about like really underlying issues that not only us as Latinos deal with, but a community. We are in a bordering city, so there's so many stories that intertwine and in a way relate. So I'm looking forward to hopefully have a second interview with you,
Absolutely, anytime.
pre-baby or post-baby, either way.
I'll have the baby the next time, right? Ano, Palomita,
Yeah, just have it on her. All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you
you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And I learned as well also too, just synthesizing things about life, always
Yeah,
humble you and always redirect you.
absolutely. Well, thank you.
Thank you.